Story number 1. My name is James, and I am currently 24 years old. I have a pretty varied life, and I would like to share with you where it all started, namely with my mother-in-law and myself. This event happened in the middle of October. By that point, I was already set on a relationship with my girlfriend. I must admit that she possesses both intelligence and beauty. She is a slender, long-haired brunette. It so happened that this relationship was my first in my life. As a result, from the very beginning of our life together, we openly discussed and resolved issues that arose. However, despite our open communication on various topics, there was one intimate issue that I never brought up, and we couldn't resolve it. I just wanted something more. I believe this is a normal desire for any man, but given my partner's moral values, I refrained from discussing the topic. Nevertheless, it was October, and the time for light dresses had passed. It was gradually getting colder, and although it was relatively pleasant during the day, the evening winds reminded me to change into warmer clothes. One evening I went to the home of my mother-in-law, named Hannah, to pick up my wife's warm clothes. Given that we were living in a rented apartment, our future plans included getting our own place. Arriving at my mother-in-law's house, slightly intoxicated after meeting friends, I was mesmerized by her company. Let me briefly describe my mother-in-law. She lost her husband 8 years ago and hadn't had a new relationship since, despite being an attractive woman who clearly cared. When I met Hannah's mother-in-law at the front door, she noticed my interest in her. "You seem to really like me, son-in-law," she said unexpectedly. Caught off guard, I hesitated to reply. "Don't worry, I'm aware of my attraction," she reassured me with a smile. Even though I had already sobered up, I could smell the odor of alcohol emanating from her. No need to be embarrassed. I was just enjoying a little get-together with friends, and I brought a bottle of wine with me. As I entered the apartment and removed my shoes, she motioned for me to come into the living room. There, my mother-in-law set the table, and we began a conversation over wine. As the night wore on and the atmosphere grew warmer, Hannah continued to flirt with me. I called my wife and informed her that I would be spending the night at her mother's house, as I didn't have the energy to drive back home. Gradually, I started explaining to my mother-in-law that things were not going well between me and my wife in bed, and asked for her advice as an experienced woman. I poured my heart out to her. In response, my mother-in-law Hannah advised, "Actions speak louder than words, son-in-law. You have to show, not just tell." After a moment's thought, she agreed to help me once, but on the condition that I keep it a secret from her daughter. She then headed for the bedroom, leaving me puzzled. Suddenly she called out to me, "Hurry up, son-in-law. Why are you standing there?" I quickly followed her, and that's when everything happened at our place. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy about the night before. From the kitchen came the aroma of scrambled eggs that Hannah was cooking. She greeted me by saying, "Breakfast is ready. You're a quick learner, son-in-law. Maybe you will visit me sometime, more than once, for I am lonely and can teach you a lot." I could not refuse her offer. Saying goodbye to my mother-in-law, I realized that my life was about to change dramatically, and the most important thing was to keep it all secret from my wife. Story number 2. Pamela's husband offered her mother to babysit their son for a few weeks while they were busy at work. She readily accepted the offer as she was tired of living alone in her small apartment. Her husband had passed away over 7 years ago, and it had been impossible to start a new relationship. Amanda was attractive, fit, with a slender build and attractive facial features. She could easily outshine many young women. Despite her desire for a serious relationship, the men she had encountered so far were no match for her. When Anthony stopped by to pick up his mother-in-law that afternoon, he was pleasantly surprised by her good physical shape. In addition, she proved to be an interesting conversationalist. As a result, she made a positive impression on her son-in-law, although he was wary of her at first. At first, Amanda interfered in their relationship with her advice and moralizing and caused him irritation. And he did not want to see a stranger in the house, even if it was his wife's mother. His wife greeted her mother warmly, embraced her tenderly, and led her into the hallway to change her clothes. She herself, meanwhile, went to check on the baby in the bedroom. Anthony took the opportunity to quietly sneak into the room where Amanda was changing. He tried to move in complete silence, but unfortunately, the sound of his footsteps and the creaking of the floor broke the necessary silence. Despite his attempts to calm himself, the excessive excitement was causing heavy breathing and a rapid heartbeat. He was only a few meters away from the cherished door. God, I'm as nervous as a schoolboy peeking at his classmate's underwear on the landing. And now he's one step away from the door. Fortunately, the door opened easily and quietly. As he entered, his mother-in-law stood before him. It was truly an amazing sight. When Anthony heard the noise from the bedroom, he hurried into the bathroom before closing the door behind him. Pamela came out of the baby's room and approached her mother. "At least close the door. You're changing your clothes," she reprimanded. "And there's the husband walking around." "And I was closing it. Maybe I forgot. You know, I'm not old enough to remember everything." Although my mother-in-law was 100% sure that she had closed the door. At such times, she was especially attentive when there were strangers in the apartment. Afterward, Pamela invited the mom into the baby's room. She showed how to take care of her son, where the things were, explained everything in detail so that the child would receive good care. And just in case, she wrote down everything in a notebook so that the mother did not forget anything, as in the case of the door. "What a beautiful boy you have." "Yes, he's beautiful. Please be careful with him." "I will." "Don't worry, we'll make everything perfect." "Let's have dinner, and then my husband and I have to go to work on the night shift. You'll always be there for your son. There's your bed over there. And make sure the cat doesn't molest the baby, because she's very playful and active." "Okay, I got it. You don't have to worry." Cats, I also love and know how to cope with them. At the table, Anthony looked a little at his mother-in-law, especially at her shoulders. Amanda didn't seem to notice his son-in-law's gaze, but in fact she saw everything perfectly. For so many years without male warmth, she caught every male gaze. To take action, of course, she was not going to do anything, expecting the man to make the first move. Although she understood perfectly well that her son-in-law was married and, as it seemed to her, loved her daughter. Therefore, nothing could have happened. But she didn't know how much her son-in-law was suffering now. After eating dinner, Pamela and her husband began to get ready for work. She was adjusting herself to the working condition. Her husband could not think about any work. In his imagination, constantly popped up tantalizing images of his mother-in-law from the bedroom while changing clothes. Anthony put his hand on his wife's legs, but she took it aside, citing a bad mood. "Again, you are not ready for tenderness. When will you already fulfill your conjugal duty?" "I can't tell you exactly. I'm not a robot. As long as I come in exhausted after work, I lack energy." "Let's do something about it. I can't take it that long either. I've got to go somewhere to release the tension." "What do you suggest?" "I don't know. I have to think of something. I'm on edge." The next day, Pamela went to work, leaving her mother-in-law, son-in-law, and son and cat at home. The spouse did not want to sleep long, despite the night shift, and went to the bedroom. Pretending to play with his son, he himself looked at his mother-in-law, dressed in his wife's robe. Everything was going in the right direction. Even the robe suggested that it was time to act. He approached his mother-in-law from behind and put his hands on her shoulders. "You frightened me." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "What are you doing?" "I'm telling my daughter." "Oh, come on. You're not going to tell her anything. Just relax and enjoy yourself." The woman's emotions were overwhelming. Amanda couldn't resist the man's touch and closed her eyes. The huge pause in the relationship was making itself felt. "Oh my God, how delightful this is. And what did I tell you?" George, cuddling his favorite toy, was sleeping peacefully in his crib, and the fluffy cat was lounging on the armchair. The joyful mother-in-law and her son-in-law were playing, at this moment, in the next room. "So you were the one who spied on me the day I arrived?" Pamela noticed that the door to my room was open while I was changing, but I remember closing it. "Yes, that was me." "And what did you tell her?" "That I probably forgot. It's my age." "Well, at your age, looking so good and being so active, it's a skill." "Thanks. We've got at least half a day to spare." "Let's take a break. I need to feed your son. And judging by the smell, I need to change his diaper." Amanda put on her robe and with a beautiful gait went to get the baby food. Anthony looked at this beauty and did not regret what had happened today. Remembering his wife, he thought, "I should have listened when I asked." You can't deny a man in bed, otherwise he will do something bad without wanting to. Story number 3. This may not be the funniest story, but life sometimes presents us with challenges. There was a small explosion in the experimental workshop, causing me temporary hearing loss and poor vision due to the bandage wrapped around my head. Fortunately, my injuries were not serious, being limited to minor bruises and burns. After 2 weeks in the hospital, I was discharged and a medical officer visited me every 2 days to change the bandage. All this time my wife was silent. Communication was difficult because of my poor hearing, and it was not easy to speak. Gradually, the pain subsided and my mental clarity improved. I adapted to moving around the house on my own and was able to do all the household chores without help. In today's world, it is hard to understand how difficult it is to be cut off from information. I could neither see nor hear, relying only on my thoughts, which were my companions for long days. As time went on, the frequency of dressing changes decreased, and a medical professional began to visit us once a week. The rest of the time, my wife took care of my basic needs, feeding me and making my bed. The rest of the situation around me did not bother me in the least. Whether it was scary or unpleasant, I can't say for sure. I didn't know how long it was before I realized that my body needed more than just food and water. I woke up early that morning, and despite trying to distract myself, I couldn't ignore the gusts of desire and thoughts bubbling up inside me. As a result, I felt utterly confused. Not knowing when the bandage would be changed, I was dumbfounded by the shame that awaited me. I barely noticed my wife bringing breakfast, only sensing her presence when she sat next to me on the bed. To be honest, breakfast wasn't the most important thing on my mind at that moment. Nevertheless, she showed no fear or disgust, just letting me do exactly what I wanted as a man, regain my strength. After that morning, my mood lifted considerably, and I felt my recovery was progressing at a faster pace. My wife continued to visit me every morning, although our life had long since moved beyond such intimate care. A new chapter had begun. I found myself loving my wife anew and looking forward to returning to our normal life. I felt like my hearing was being restored. I could hear what was going on around me, but for some reason, I could hear my wife from far away and very, very quietly. The burns on my body gradually began to heal, allowing me to speak. Despite the silence of the medical staff, I spoke while changing bandages. My doctor arrived, examined me, assured me that my condition was improving, and noted that I no longer needed bandages. He asked me to come see him for my next appointment. Surprisingly, I could hear him just fine. Before leaving, he wished me a speedy recovery. To my surprise, I later learned that my wife had agreed to a long business trip because of my illness, leaving the care of me to her mother. There is no telling what the future holds, but only time will tell the outcome. Story number 4. My wife was planning to go south with a friend, but I was adamantly opposed. First of all, it would be expensive, and secondly, I knew what they would do there. There would be no supervision or control over them. However, my wife really wanted to relax under a palm tree, bask in the sun, and swim in the sea. She persisted and asked me for money. I refused her request, firmly stating that I would not finance the trip. She seemed to have lost all sense of responsibility. We don't live a luxurious lifestyle, so we need to save money. And then a crazy idea popped into my head. Let's make a trade, I suggested to my wife. Confused, she asked, "What do you mean?" I explained that there wouldn't be much out of the ordinary to ask. She eagerly asked what I would require of her in return. At first, I thought about convincing her to fulfill her marital duties, but I had a better idea. I needed a mother-in-law. Yes, I needed her. She had been catching my eye for a long time, flaunting her short skirts. My wife was unenthusiastic about my proposal. By the way, her relationship with her mother is not very good. They often quarreled over nothing. Both were very temperamental. However, she had a strong desire to spend time by the sea. Her plan was to stay in a hotel for a week, doing nothing but relaxing and eating pounds of fruit. She finally agreed by the evening. "Okay," she said, "you can try to hit on my mother, but I can't guarantee the outcome." I pondered silently, confident in my abilities. After packing my wife's suitcase and transferring the money to her card, I accompanied her and her friend to the airport and returned home. Upon arrival, I perfumed myself and went to my mother-in-law's house. I was in high spirits and was sure she would not be able to resist me. She is a charming woman, always changing partners easily. So why wouldn't she agree to go out with me? Especially since my wife gave her blessing, albeit reluctantly. I showed up on my mother-in-law's doorstep unannounced, hoping to surprise her. And indeed, upon opening the door, she was stunned. "Where is my daughter?" she asked. "Usually we came to visit together, but this time I was alone." "Your daughter has gone to the sea," I informed her with a sly wink. The mother-in-law either didn't understand or chose to ignore my hint. Women can be quite mysterious. "Well, come on in," she finally said. He entered the kitchen and spread the food on the table. My mother-in-law sighed at the sight. "Why did you have to spend so much money?" she asked. I could see, however, that she was pleased. When we sat down at the table, she quickly placed the meat on plates and took a seat next to me. Then, with a note of concern, she asked, "What brings you here, son-in-law? Do you have some business with me, or did you just drop in as a relative?" I looked at her with a puzzled look, then met her eyes. "What do you think?" I replied. A faint blush appeared on my mother-in-law's cheeks. "I'm not sure," she replied with a mischievous gleam in her eyes. She understood everything perfectly well. She had a temper of her own. Anyway, we ended up where we wanted to be. I can't remember who made the first move, me or my mother-in-law. And what happened next, I prefer not to discuss. Anyway, we had a delightful evening. Called a cab, came home. I lay in the bathtub to gather my thoughts and strength, and in general to rest. I slept beautifully. The next day, I went to my mother-in-law's again. I thought my wife would have 7 days off. A whole week. And I, like a fool, will sit at home. No, it won't work that way. We should have equal vacations. Especially since I paid for my wife's trip, and I could have refused. My mother-in-law met me with a smile, happy to see me. She claimed not to remember what had happened between us the day before, which surprised me. She seemed completely confused. I assured her that nothing terrible had happened. We hugged briefly, and that was the end of it. My answer calmed her down, but she warned me not to let her drink too much wine. She said she could do something bad when she was drunk. I rubbed my hands together with joy and started pouring more wine into my mother-in-law's glass. The second night also went smoothly. At first hesitant, my mother-in-law eventually drank more at my insistence. We really bonded. Back home, I thought of my wife. I was glad she was on vacation and maybe cheating on me. I didn't regret the money spent. She deserved a vacation too. No wonder nothing had changed on the third day. My mother-in-law met me cordially, but complained of a headache from the day before. We decided to have tea that day, and I agreed. Despite the headache, she behaved cheerfully and youthfully. I was amazed. The first day was stressful, but ended well. The second day was okay, and the third day was fantastic. I wondered what the next day would bring. With that thought in mind, I headed home, exhausted. After taking a shower, I climbed into bed and fell soundly asleep, a rare occurrence for me. It usually takes me a while to fall asleep, but such was the effect of visiting my mother-in-law. We surprised each other. As my wife's vacation came to an end, the last few days flew by quickly. I had the opportunity to meet with my mother-in-law every day. During this time, I made sure to stock up on groceries, wine, sweets, and baked goods. However, the last day before my wife arrived was particularly memorable. My mother-in-law surprised me by opening the door in a special outfit, and I was stunned. Throughout the week, I had not had a chance to appreciate her figure because of the fast pace and hustle and bustle of our socializing. But now I finally had the opportunity to see her. I must say, she's not bad at all considering my mother-in-law is 55 years old. Her legs are quite slender, although her knees are a little big. Nevertheless, that didn't put me off. I was pleased with what I saw. We repeated the procedure again, but this time with more intensity than before. We both knew that we would never get another chance like this again, and that life would continue as scripted. However, the week we spent together was a priceless gift to us. We couldn't complain about each other's efforts. We had accomplished a lot. It was time to prepare for my wife's homecoming. As I stood in the hallway, my mother-in-law hugged me and told me that she had tickets for a vacation at the lake, but she had changed her mind about going there. The trip was scheduled for the coming week, and she had thought about offering the tickets to her daughter. I thought that was a terrific idea. I wouldn't mind spending another week with my favorite mother-in-law. We have developed a good relationship. So I agreed to offer the tickets on her behalf. That was the end of our conversation. When my wife returned, she said nothing but looked at me with suspicion. However, I maintained an indifferent and bored expression on my face. She didn't ask anything about her mother, probably for fear of what she might hear. She'd had a good time herself. I know what girlfriends do on the seas too. My wife left, and I went straight to my mother-in-law's. She was preparing a surprise for me. I can't even imagine what it's gonna be. Story number 5. I once set up an inflatable pool in the backyard for the kids to swim in hot weather. Even the adults did not deny themselves the pleasure, although I refrained because of my large size. My wife, however, took the opportunity to enjoy it. When the temperature rose, I happened to see my mother-in-law in her swimsuit. Naturally, I discreetly watched her, trying not to let anyone notice that I was doing so. I scrutinized her appearance, as there was a lot to evaluate. She had maintained a good figure and had not gained any excess weight since her retirement. I would call her quite attractive. Especially impressive is her rear end, firm and well balanced. Interestingly, my wife's physique is not as attractive. She is fond of sweets and baked goods. On the other hand, my mother-in-law consumes more protein, meat, and nuts. While observing my mother-in-law, a desperate thought occurred to me. What if we nail her somewhere by the pool? What would come of that? These thoughts kept me on my toes. My mother-in-law was an undeniably attractive, lush, and mature woman. Perhaps in 5 years she would no longer possess her former beauty. Right now, however, she was simply ravishing. The swimsuit was revealing, emphasizing her lush breasts. The swim trunks were miniature and made me fantasize. I looked at my mother-in-law's legs with admiration. They were amazingly slender and beautiful. Personally, I find it unattractive when a woman doesn't have sexy legs. When I imagined my mother-in-law wrapping her strong legs around me, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt a sense of confidence, knowing that I would wait patiently for the right moment. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law playfully entered the inflatable pool, sat down inside, and happily splashed water on herself. Her water-soaked swimsuit excited me greatly. Normally, I keep my emotions under control. However, sitting on a folding chair under the apple tree, I pretended to be engrossed in my phone while I secretly watched her. She was diving, bouncing and laughing heartily, which became unbearable for me. So I went inside for a drink of water to cool down. However, I changed my mind and poured myself a glass of beer and then another. The alcohol made me feel dizzy, but I quickly came to my senses. At that moment, my wife appeared in the yard in a bathing suit. She was pacing back and forth, but I didn't pay attention to her. Everything about my wife is familiar to me and has no intrigue, unlike her mother. Therein lies the novelty. I couldn't wait to see my mother-in-law in all her glory. She was standing on the lawn after getting out of the pool, her strong legs glistening and resembling the legs of an athlete. The heat was so intense that the water droplets on her body evaporated instantly. I looked at her again. She stood basking in the sun and then dove back into the pool. She surfaced on her belly and began to paddle with her arms and legs, making the water splash in all directions. At that moment, I longed to join her in the pool, to really get to know her, to the point where my jaw would drop, out of pleasure. My mother-in-law stepped out of the water, shook off the excess moisture, and headed into the house to change. I froze in place, making my way to the window of her room. Luckily, there were thick bushes nearby, hiding my observation of her. I stood at the window, my heart pounding uncontrollably. My mother-in-law was standing by the closet, and my breath caught. What a woman she was! Her skin was as white as milk, and the rest of her body was adorned with a tan. I'm not sure exactly why, but she lit a fire in me. I was lucky that she did everything very slowly. She stood with her back to me and then turned sideways. I felt a little uncomfortable. I watched the whole process until she was fully dressed. After that, I slowly moved away from the window. My thoughts were a mess. I don't remember almost anything that happened next. I was constantly watching her to see where she was going. So I waited patiently for her. I waited for her in the far corner of the house. It is a spacious hallway in the house with 2 partitions. She was standing near the coat rack looking for things. I approached her from behind and hugged her from the back. A strong desire swept over me, and I couldn't control myself. At first, she jerked in surprise, but then she pulled herself together. Unfortunately, there are always people in the house, and it was getting in our way. I believe my mother-in-law purposely frolicked in the pool in front of me. She knew I was a young, healthy man. She probably realized that this spectacle would have an effect on me. So she didn't put on a show for no reason. I said all this in a shaky voice as we stood in the aisle. From that day on, there was a change in her. My mother-in-law began to follow me. Not me, after her. She wanted more, and I couldn't refuse her. I was consumed by greed. I couldn't resist that desire. I have a normal wife, and I'm not complaining, but I switch easily from one woman to another. I crave variety. Besides, every woman is unique, and that's always intriguing. Each one has something special to offer. I enjoy exploring the differences and comparing them, determining which one is better. My wife drives me crazy. I become like a crazy person as soon as she lets me get close to her. So my wife can't complain that I don't pay her enough attention. I don't ignore her. In the evening, I found myself with my mother-in-law in the hallway again. She purposefully lingered there for quite some time. It is worth noting that she had changed her attire at home, which caught my attention. She chose a robe that could be easily unraveled. The action was swift. I approached my mother-in-law, fascinated by her attractive appearance. To my surprise, she looked shocked as she was used to a different lifestyle. From that day onwards, mother-in-law became cheerful and made every effort to please me. She cooked delicious meals, knowing that I was very fond of pancakes. She often baked them, and on the table put sour cream, jam, in general, all that I like to eat. She also put a napkin next to my plate so that I could wipe my mouth. She made sure I had a hearty meal. The atmosphere was friendly and affectionate, and I believed it should always be that way. As I devoured the pancakes, I couldn't help but think how grateful I was to my mother-in-law for her kindness. In return, I did my chores to express my love. I was diligent and quickly learned what she particularly liked in an effort to please her. The intelligent woman gave me 3 times as much pleasure. Not only did she recognize my satisfaction, but she emphasized those subtleties. She also took my wife into consideration, although my main focus at this point was my mother-in-law. Even though my wife is younger, the emotions are more vivid with my mother-in-law. In time, she too will become commonplace like everything else. However, one must seize the moment. Such opportunities in life are rare. I had a wonderful time. My mother-in-law fed me generously, and I even gained a few pounds. My wife was by my side the whole time and was always cheerful during our vacation. She never complained or nagged. She is not just a wife, but a dream. It happened that my father-in-law was absent, having gone on a business trip for a week. When he returned, the situation changed. My mother-in-law became more cautious. Nevertheless, we managed to find a solution by hiding in a neighboring empty house while my father-in-law slept after dinner.